Far beyond the stars there was a queen who ruled with iron hands and a cold heart. Her empire stretched across dozens of worlds, and her subjects feared her name. To them she was not only a leader, but a goddess in flesh, beautiful and terrifying. She was known as Queen Zira, the ruler of the Sirak dominion. Her crown was carved from the bones of her enemies, her throne built from the ashes of conquered worlds. No one dared to stand against her, no one except whispers of a small and fragile race, the humans. To Queen Zira, humans were nothing. Weak bodies, short lives, simple technology, and endless emotions. She often called them the children of dust. In her grand halls, she laughed whenever their name was spoken. Humans are soft, she declared, her voice echoing like thunder. They dream of stars, but they are not made for stars. Her generals bowed, her court cheered, and her enemies trembled. But fate has a cruel sense of humor, and destiny never bends to pride. One night, while her empire celebrated the victory of another world, Queen Zira sat on her throne, staring into the void through the crystal windows of her palace. She remembered a rumor she once heard from an old seer. The prophecy had been dismissed. Mocked and even banned, it said, "The queen who mocks the dust will one day carry its spark and the galaxy will change forever." The words lingered in the shadows of her memory. Zira had destroyed the seer who spoke them, yet the prophecy lived in whispers. Whenever she remembered it, she laughed to herself. Me bearing the child of a human? Impossible, she told herself with pride. But deep inside, something unsettled her. Why did the prophecy refuse to die, even after she silenced its speaker? Why did it echo in her mind on quiet nights when the palace halls were silent? The thought made her angry, and she crushed her glass of crimson wine in her hand. The shards cut her skin, but she did not flinch. Pain was nothing to a queen who conquered galaxies. Still, the feeling of unease clung to her heart like a shadow she could not chase away. Her empire continued to grow. Planets burned, cities fell, and millions bent the knee before her. But the more power she gained, the more she noticed something strange. In the far corners of the galaxy, humans resisted her armies with a fire she had not seen before. They lost battles, yes, but they never surrendered. Her soldiers mocked them, but reports spoke of humans fighting even when all hope was gone. Their courage was not power, not strength, but something else. It was stubborn, unshakable, almost foolish, and yet it spread like a spark in dry wood. Even the queen herself could not deny that there was something different about them. One day, during a war council, a commander mentioned a captured human soldier. He had survived battles where no one should have lived. He refused to kneel even in chains. When this news was spoken, the queen laughed before her court. "What is one human to me?" she asked, her voice sharp as a blade. "Bring him and I will show you how weak they truly are." Her generals laughed with her, believing it was only another show of her cruelty. But destiny had already taken its first step. The human was on his way, and with him, the beginning of a story that would shake the stars. As the queen rose from her throne that night, her eyes burned like twin suns, cold and merciless. The galaxy was hers, her throne unshakable, her will unbreakable. Yet the prophecy whispered again in her mind, "The queen who mocks the dust will one day carry its spark." She clenched her fists and looked into the endless night sky. "Never," she whispered to herself. But the stars above seemed to laugh back at her, for fate was already watching, waiting, and smiling. The queen's command was clear. The captured human soldier was to be brought before her throne, her. Generals expected a broken man, thin from hunger, shaking with fear. But what entered her grand hall was something none of them predicted. The prisoner's hands were chained, his uniform torn, his face marked with wounds. Yet he did not bow. He walked with slow, heavy steps, his eyes straight and unflinching. He did not look at the soldiers guarding him, nor the nobles who sneered at his weakness. He looked only at the queen, and in that gaze, there was no fear, no begging, only fire. Queen Zira leaned back on her throne, her golden eyes narrowing. She expected him to tremble, expected him to kneel. But the human stood tall even when pushed to the floor by her guards. The hall went silent, a silence heavy enough to press against every chest. The queen rose, her steps echoing on the black stone floor. She circled the prisoner like a predator circling prey. "What is your name, Dustborn?" she asked, her voice smooth yet sharp. The human lifted his head and answered, "My name is Daniel." The court erupted in laughter. The nobles shouted insults, calling him weak, calling him dirt. But Daniel's eyes did not leave the queen. That look, steady, stubborn, fearless, was like a blade cutting through the air. The queen felt something she had not felt in centuries. Not fear, not anger, but curiosity. This was no ordinary man. "Do you know who I am?" she asked, her voice rising like thunder. "I am Queen Zyra, destroyer of empires, ruler of the Serac Dominion, goddess of the stars." Her words shook the hall, but Daniel did not flinch. "You are just another tyrant," he said calmly. Gasps filled the chamber. Her generals reached for their weapons, but the queen raised her hand and stopped them. Her lips curled into a smile, sharp and dangerous. "No one dares speak to me like that," she whispered. "And yet you dare." She studied him as if he were a puzzle carved by the gods themselves. He had no power, no army, no throne, yet his spirit was unbroken. Why, she wondered, did this fragile human not fear her? Was it ignorance, or was it something more? Something inside her stirred, a feeling she hated. Respect. The queen ordered him to be taken to a private chamber instead of the dungeon. Her court was shocked. Her generals whispered, but none dared question her. That night, Zyra stood alone in her chambers, her thoughts restless like a storm in the void. The image of Daniel's eyes would not leave her mind. Those eyes had defied her power, her throne, her crown. Those eyes had stared into the heart of the galaxy and refused to bend. She clenched her fists, furious at herself. How could a single human shake her thoughts? He was nothing. Dust, weak, mortal. And yet she remembered his words. "You are just another tyrant." The sentence echoed in her ears, burning hotter than fire. Why did it matter to her what a human thought? Why did her chest tighten every time she recalled it? Meanwhile, in his chamber, Daniel sat in silence. He was wounded, starving, and chained, but his spirit did not break. He remembered the faces of his people, the screams of his comrades. He remembered why he fought, why he survived. To him, the queen was not a goddess, not an unshakable throne. She was simply an enemy, and enemies, no matter how powerful, could bleed. The palace walls seemed to hold their breath. The guards whispered of the strange human who did not bow. The nobles gossiped about why the queen spared him. Some claimed she planned to use him for cruel entertainment. Others whispered of darker things, but none of them knew the truth, not even the queen herself. As the twin moons of her world rose over the crystal towers, Zyra stood at her window, staring into the stars. Her empire was strong, her throne unshaken, yet she felt a storm approaching. She thought of the prophecy once more, the one she had destroyed. The queen who mocks the dust will one day carry its spark. Her chest tightened, her breath slowed. She shook her head and laughed coldly. Impossible, she told herself. Impossible. But deep inside, in the silence of her own heart, Queen Zyra felt something she could never admit. This human, Daniel, was not like the others, and his arrival was not an accident. Fate had placed him here in her palace, in her path. And fate was never wrong. Days turned into weeks, and the human prisoner remained in the queen's palace. At first, Queen Zyra thought she kept him alive for amusement. She told herself she wanted to watch him break, to see his spirit collapse like the others. But to her surprise, he never broke. Every day the guards reported the same thing. Daniel refused to kneel, refused to beg, refused to cry. Even when offered food, only if he bowed. He went hungry instead. Even when beaten by the soldiers, he stood up, again his eyes burning like fire. The queen heard the reports and laughed before her court. "Let the dust starve, let him suffer, he will learn his place," she said. But deep inside she was waiting for something, waiting to see if he truly would bend. One evening, She ordered him to be brought to her private chamber. The nobles were shocked, whispering like snakes in the shadows. The queen ignored them. Daniel was dragged before her, his chains rattling, his face bruised but proud. The queen stepped close, so close she could hear his breath. "Why do you not bow to me?" she asked softly. "Because you are not my queen," he answered, his voice steady. Her heart skipped a beat, though she hid it behind a cold smile. For the first time in centuries, someone had spoken to her not with fear but with truth. Her generals lied to please her. Her nobles flattered her. Her enemies begged for mercy. But this man spoke as if she were no different than anyone else. It was madness. It was insult. Yet it stirred something inside her. She tested him again, and again. Some nights she offered him fine food. He refused. Some days she threatened him with death. He did not tremble. Once she even held a blade to his throat. His eyes never moved from hers. It was as if nothing in the galaxy could break him, and the more she tested him, the more she found herself drawn to him. The queen hated weakness. She had crushed empires because their rulers begged for life. She despised softness. Yet this human's defiance was not weakness. It was strength of a different kind, a strength that came not from weapons, not from armies, but from within. She did not want to admire him, but her heart betrayed her. Her court began to whisper. Some said the queen had gone mad. Others believed she was preparing to use the human as a weapon. But the whispers grew louder with each passing day. Even her closest advisors feared she was showing something dangerous: attachment. Daniel, too, felt the strangeness of his situation. He hated the queen, hated the empire that killed his people. And yet, whenever she entered the chamber, he could not deny the weight of her presence. She was beautiful and terrifying, cruel but also alive. He had seen rulers before, but none like her. There was fire in her eyes, and for reasons he could not explain, he wanted to challenge it. They spoke in short conversations. At first it was only sharp words and insults, but slowly, questions slipped between the anger. She asked him about Earth, about human history, about why they fought with such spirit. He answered with simple truths. "We fight because life is short, and short life makes it precious." She listened in silence, the words sinking into her heart like seeds in soil. One night, when the palace was quiet and the moons hung low, the queen stood at her window, her thoughts heavy. Her reflection in the glass showed a ruler who feared nothing, but inside she feared what was happening to her. This man, this fragile human, was changing her, and she hated it. She clenched her fists, whispering to herself, "I am Queen Zyra. I need no one. I bow to no one." Yet her heart argued with her mind. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his defiant stare. Every time she walked into the hall, she heard his voice calling her a tyrant. Why did it matter? Why did she care? The unwanted bond was growing, silent and dangerous. It was something she could not admit to her court, not even to herself. But fate does not wait for permission, and destiny does not ask for consent. Without realizing it, the queen and the human were being tied together by invisible threads, threads that no sword could cut, no throne could command. The empire outside remained blind. The nobles still laughed, the generals still boasted. But in the quiet chambers of the palace, something far greater than war was unfolding, a bond unwanted, yet unbreakable. And the galaxy, though it did not know it yet, would tremble because of it. The queen thought she had buried the prophecy long ago. She thought the words of the old seer had burned with his body. But destiny never dies so easily, and on a night when the stars seemed too quiet, the prophecy returned. It began with whispers in the palace. An old oracle from the edge of the dominion had been captured by her soldiers. She was frail, her skin pale as ash, her eyes glowing with strange light. The guards laughed at her madness, but they brought her before the queen, for the oracle demanded it. She claimed she had words only the queen should hear. The court gathered, waiting for another show of power. The queen sat high upon her throne, her golden crown heavy on her brow. The oracle knelt, her voice trembling yet sharp. "You cannot escape what has been written, O Queen of Stars," she said. "The dust you mock will shape your blood. and through it the galaxy will tremble. The hall froze, the air turning heavy like iron. The queen's eyes blazed with fury. She rose from her throne, her voice echoing like thunder. "Lies!" she roared. "The last fool who spoke those words died by my hand." The oracle smiled, her face calm despite the danger. "And yet here the words are again, for fate is not so easily killed." The nobles whispered nervously. The generals shifted uncomfortably, for many of them remembered the first prophecy, though they feared to speak of it. Now the same words returned, stronger than before, and the queen's own rage only gave them more weight. Sira stepped closer to the oracle, her shadow falling over the old woman. "Do you think I will spare you?" she hissed. "I do not need your mercy," the oracle replied, her glowing eyes fixed on the queen. "I only speak what has already begun." The queen felt her heart race, though she hid it behind a mask of steel, for in her mind, she saw Daniel's face, the defiant human who refused to bow, the spark that would not die. "No," she whispered to herself, clenching her fists. "This bond is nothing. I control my own fate." But the oracle's voice cut through her denial like a blade. "The bond is already made, though you refuse to see it," she said. "Your heart has shifted, and soon your bloodline will follow." The hall erupted in shock, nobles gasping, soldiers muttering. The queen silenced them with a single glare. She ordered the oracle taken away, her fate left undecided, but the damage was already done. The words had been spoken, the prophecy was alive again. That night, alone in her chambers, the queen could not rest. Her hands trembled as she poured herself wine. She told herself it was anger, not fear. She told herself the oracle was a liar. Yet in the silence, she remembered the way Daniel looked. At her, strong, unbroken, unafraid. No one in her empire had ever looked at her like that, not with worship, not with terror, but with truth. She walked to her mirror, staring at her reflection. She saw the crown, the robes, the power, but behind her golden eyes, she saw something else. A crack in her armor, a weakness she had sworn never to have. The thought made her furious, and, yet deep inside, it also made her feel alive. Meanwhile, in the chamber where he was kept, Daniel also felt the shift. The guards spoke carelessly, thinking he could not hear. They whispered of the prophecy, of how the queen might be cursed. Daniel laughed quietly to himself. He never believed in destiny. But if his presence could shake an empire, then maybe fate was on his side. The palace buzzed with fear and curiosity. Whispers crawled through the halls like shadows. The prophecy became a forbidden topic, yet it spread faster than fire. Every noble, every soldier, every servant knew. The queen's fate was tied to a human, and nothing terrified them more. The queen tried to bury the words. She told her generals to silence the whispers. She punished those who dared speak of it. But the more she fought against it, the stronger it grew. Even she could not silence the voice inside her heart. A voice that whispered when she was alone. A voice that sounded like Daniel. The unwanted bond was no longer hidden. It was becoming destiny. And though the queen still mocked the idea with her lips, her heart knew the truth. Fate had already chosen, and fate never loses. The queen's palace was never truly silent. Behind the gold walls and crystal towers, there were always whispers. Whispers of power, whispers of fear, and whispers of betrayal. The prophecy had spread like fire, and though the queen ordered silence, her empire could not forget. Her nobles feared it, her generals despised it, for if the prophecy was true, their queen would no longer belong only to them. She would be changed by a human, tied to dust, tied to weakness. To them, it was an insult to everything they believed, and in their fear, seeds of treachery began to grow. One noble in particular, Lord Vaynor, was the first to act. He was ambitious, hungry for the throne. He believed the queen's heart was softening, and a soft queen was a danger to the dominion. If she was distracted by this human, he thought, then she could be replaced. In the shadows of the palace, he gathered allies, generals who feared losing their honor, nobles who feared losing their power. Together, they formed a secret pact. to end the prophecy before it could take root. Their plan was simple: kill the human prisoner, erase the bond, and restore the queen to her ruthless self. No bond, no prophecy, no weakness. They moved carefully, knowing the queen's eyes missed nothing, but even the sharpest ruler cannot watch every shadow at once. Meanwhile, Daniel remained in his chamber. He did not know the depth of the danger around him, but he felt it in the air, the way the guards avoided his gaze, the way the noble's eyes burned with hatred whenever he passed. He knew he was not only a prisoner anymore. He had become a symbol, and symbols are always dangerous. One night, as the moons hid behind clouds, the betrayal struck. A group of masked soldiers entered his chamber silently. Their blades gleamed in the dim light, their orders clear: end the human before the queen could stop them. Daniel fought back with desperate strength. His chains rattled, his fists struck, his blood spilled. But he did not yield. He never yielded. The noise reached the queen's guards, and chaos broke through the palace. By the time Zira arrived, the chamber was painted with blood. Daniel stood wounded but alive, surrounded by fallen traitors. His chest rose and fell with heavy breaths, but his eyes were still defiant. For a moment, the queen stood frozen, not at the sight of blood, for she had seen oceans of it, but at the truth that screamed before her. This man refused to die, even when the shadows turned against him. Her fury exploded. She ordered every traitor dragged into the light. Lord Vaynor was found and thrown at her feet, trembling. "You dare betray me?" she roared, her voice shaking the palace walls. "You dare touch what is mine?" The hall fell silent, her words hanging heavy. None missed what she had said. She had claimed the human, claimed Daniel as hers. Vaynor spat blood and hissed, "You are no queen of stars. You are a slave to prophecy." The words were meant to wound her, but they only fueled her rage. Without hesitation, she struck him down before the court, his blood staining the black stone floor. Her golden eyes blazed as she looked upon the rest of the nobles. "Let this be the fate of all who betray me," she declared, and none dared to move. That night, after the chaos was silenced, she returned to Daniel's side. He was wounded, his body trembling, but his spirit was unbroken. She ordered her own healers to treat him, not the palace physicians. She stayed in the chamber longer than she intended. Her eyes lingered on him as he rested. For the first time, she admitted the truth in her heart. She did not want to lose him. Not to battle, not to treachery, not to fate. The Queen of Stars, who once mocked the Dustborn, now protected one with her own hands. Her court saw weakness, but she felt something else: strength. Because when Daniel stood bleeding but unbroken, she realized he carried a power her entire empire lacked. A power that no crown, no army, no throne could give her. And that power was now tied to her destiny. Yet in the shadows of the galaxy, betrayal never dies. Even as the queen crushed the traitors in her palace, more enemies stirred beyond her reach. The prophecy had not only shaken her empire, it had drawn the eyes of greater powers, and soon she would face not whispers, but storms. The palace still carried the scars of betrayal. Blood had been washed from the stone floors, but the memory remained. The queen had silenced her traitors, yet her empire whispered louder than ever. And in those whispers, one truth echoed again and again. The queen was changing. Her generals noticed it first. She no longer looked at Daniel as a prisoner. Her eyes lingered on him with something unspoken. Her court dared not speak it aloud, but fear gripped their hearts. For a queen who changes is a queen who cannot be controlled. Daniel recovered slowly from his wounds. Every day he trained his body. Even with chains still at his wrists, he moved. With purpose, refusing weakness, refusing rest. The queen watched from a distance. She told herself it was curiosity, nothing more. But in her chest a storm grew. Respect, admiration, and something far more dangerous. Then came the invasion. Another alien faction, long jealous of the dominion, rose in rebellion. They saw the queen's moment of weakness and struck like wolves. Their fleets burned the edges of her empire. Their armies pushed toward her throne world. The nobles panicked. The generals begged for orders. But the queen stood silent, her mind heavy. For the first time in centuries, she questioned herself. Was she still the same unshakable ruler? Or had the prophecy already taken her crown? Her doubts burned like fire, until a voice broke through the storm, Daniel's voice. "You are not weak," he told her, his eyes steady as always. "You are afraid of what you feel, but feelings are not weakness." The queen turned on him, furious. "No human speaks to me of strength," she hissed. But her anger could not silence the truth in his words. Her empire did not need the queen who mocked. It needed the queen who could rise. When the enemy fleet reached her world, the palace shook with fire. Explosions lit the sky. Soldiers screamed in the halls. The throne room trembled as alarms wailed. The queen armed herself, her armor gleaming like a burning star. And to the shock of every noble and general, she unlocked Daniel's chains. "Fight with me," she commanded. Her voice low but fierce, Daniel nodded without hesitation. For the first time they stood side by side, not as queen and prisoner, but as warriors. The battle was chaos. Alien soldiers stormed the palace, their blades hungry for royal blood. The queen cut through them like fire through paper, her strength unmatched, her fury unstoppable. Yet she was not alone. Daniel fought at her side, his strikes sharp and fearless. Though outnumbered, he never faltered. His courage burned brighter than any weapon, and together they became a force no enemy could withstand. At one moment, Daniel saved her. An enemy blade aimed for her heart, but his arm blocked the strike, blood spilling down his side. The queen froze for a heartbeat, not because of danger, but because someone had bled for her. Not for fear, not for power, but simply because he chose to. Her heart, colder than stone for centuries, cracked open, and she knew, in that moment, that she could not lose him. The palace shook with victory and loss. Bodies lay across the halls, smoke rising from shattered walls, but the queen stood alive, Daniel standing beside her, his body bleeding but his spirit unbroken. Her generals bowed, her nobles knelt, but her eyes were fixed only on him, the human, who had fought like no soldier she had ever known. The human who turned her fury into strength. That night, as healers worked on Daniel's wounds, the queen sat silently near his side, her golden armor cracked, her hands stained with blood. For the first time in her life, she did not feel like a goddess. She felt like a woman who had found something worth more than a throne. She whispered words only the walls could hear. "You have changed me." The Queen of Stars, feared across galaxies, had fought not for conquest but for someone else. It was transformation not written in law, not carved in stone. It was transformation carved in the heart. And though she still wore her crown, she knew the prophecy was no longer a shadow. It was alive, breathing and beating in her chest. The galaxy outside was burning with war, but within her, something far greater had been born. And fate, watching silently from the stars, smiled once more. The war was over, but the scars of battle still burned across the Dominion. The enemy fleets had been broken, their leaders scattered into the void. The queen had stood victorious once more, yet this victory felt different. For the first time, in her reign she had not fought alone. Daniel, the human who once entered her palace in chains, had fought by her side. His blood had spilled on her floors. His courage had saved her life. And though her throne remained unshaken and eternal, something within her had changed forever. The prophecy she once mocked now whispered louder than ever in her heart. The nobles trembled when they looked at her. They no longer saw only the cold ruler crowned in gold. They saw a queen whose eyes lingered on a human with a fire no crown could extinguish. Whispers filled the palace halls. "The prophecy is real," they said. "The prophecy has already begun." At first, the queen denied it. She told herself it was nothing more than gratitude. She told herself Daniel was only a warrior, a symbol of strength in dark times. But the truth lived in her heart. When she looked at him, she did not see dust. She saw a flame strong enough to change the stars. Weeks passed, and the Dominion rebuilt itself. But with every day, her feelings grew heavier. She began to dream. Dreams she once thought impossible. Dreams of a child with her golden eyes and his fire. dreams of a future not written by conquest but by unity. The thought terrified her, yet it also made her feel alive in a way war never had. Then the moment came, silent and undeniable. The Queen's healers spoke to her in secret. They told her what she already felt in her bones. Life was growing inside her. A child, half alien, half human. The prophecy had been fulfilled for a long time. She stood at her window, staring into the endless sky. Her hands rested on her chest, her heart pounding like a war drum. The Queen, who once laughed at the idea, now trembled before it. She remembered the words of the seer she had silenced long ago. The Queen who mocks the dust will one day carry its spark, and the galaxy will change forever. She had mocked, she had denied, but fate had proved her wrong. When Daniel learned the truth, his face was calm, but his eyes burned with shock. He never dreamed that his life, once chained in the Queen's hall, would carry such a future. "You are not alone in this," he told her, and though his voice was steady, he knew the weight of what they now carried. It was not just a child. It was a future, a bond between two worlds that had once been enemies. But the galaxy does not forgive change so easily. The nobles were horrified. The generals enraged. They saw the child as an abomination, a danger to the Dominion's pride. Some whispered of killing it before it was born. Others spoke of rebellion. The empire that once bowed in fear now trembled with division. Yet the Queen stood unshaken. She placed her hand on her crown and raised her head high before her court. She declared the truth. "This child is not weakness," she said, her voice thunderous. "This child is strength. The future of two peoples, the bond that will outlast empires." Her generals bowed their heads in silence. Her nobles bit their tongues in fear, and for the first time, they saw a ruler greater than a conqueror. They saw a mother who would fight not for power, but for destiny. Daniel stood beside her as the court fell silent. For once, no chains bound him. No guards surrounded him. He stood as an equal, his presence a reminder that even dust could shape the stars. The Queen glanced at him, and though she said nothing, her eyes spoke the truth. She had once called him nothing. Now he was everything. Far above, the stars burned brighter. The galaxy held its breath. The prophecy had not ended. It had only begun. For the child growing within her was not only hers or his. It was a child of two worlds, a bridge between enemies, a spark destined to ignite the future. The Queen who mocked the dust now carried its fire, and the galaxy would never be the same again.